Hello, hello, hello. I am so excited to be here today. Today, I am here with Robin Bogle. She is a trauma-informed love and intimacy coach. Recognized as one of the top teachers of the heart in her community, Robin is known for providing trauma-informed, heart-centered solutions that are designed to ignite a sense of love, expand the spirit, and heal the past. In a time of fleeting social media interactions, 1 hour coffee dates, and a world that looks like it's falling apart, Robin offers hope, genuine human connection, and inner transformation. Participants that go to her events are enveloped in a warm transmission of divine love, absorbing heart healing wisdom shared by Robin. Seemingly stuck patterns and wounds from the past can find resolution and peace. Participants gain a renewed sense of love, connection, and intimacy in their lives and witness the activation of their own intuitive heart. You'll experience the power of love in its most transformative form. Robin has led hundreds of retreats, workshops, and classes with thousands of participants and clients in the US and abroad. Robin, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you so much, Francine. Beautiful
So,
introduction. Thank you.
oh, thank you for being here. So, one does not go to high school, graduate high school or go to college and say, I'm going to be a trauma informed, and maybe they do, but I'm going to assume this wasn't your path, as it is most people I talk to on my podcast. So, how did you get here? Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got here.
Okay, well, because you said that, it brought me right back to probably sixth grade.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
I know, it's funny. I'll drop in this story first. So, in sixth grade, I grew up on Long Island in New York. And in sixth grade, I got it into my head that I need to learn more about sex and relationships. It's
Interesting.
really weird because I was very, very shy, so shy. But I did ride my bicycle a couple of miles, probably about 3 miles by myself after school from my house to the public library in town. And I took out a handful of books, put them in my backpack, and rode my bicycle home.
Oh my gosh.
When I got home, I hid them under my bed. And of course, I knew when they were due. So I was very, very careful not to have anybody, you know,
Right.
pick up that I had these books. So I started reading. I don't honestly remember the content, but I remember the experience of,
Wow, that's fascinating.
yeah.
What do you think prompted that? Do you have any inclination of what prompted that?
I imagine if, because I don't remember my thinking at the time. My mother had died already, so I didn't have like this mother influence in my life. So that's one piece. I was like growing up with a man, my father, a
Right.
younger sister. And I think I always felt very young. I had a late birthday, so I was youngest in the class and going through the emotional trauma that I had gone through. I probably was also more immature than my classmates. And they were starting to kiss boys and to fall in love and to get crushes and to, go to second base and all these things. And
Whatever you do in sixth grade,
yeah,
right?
totally. And I just had really no idea. Like I was so naive. I just didn't understand it. And
The fact that
all
you even
those,
could conscious, like, I don't know, at sixth grade, I even knew what sex was,
yeah,
right? So,
totally.
yeah.
No idea. I was reading Judy Blume books. Thank God for Judy Blume.
Well, all right. Then there's that, right?
I
Yeah.
learned a lot from her. But I think, yeah, I think I was curious and I was afraid. And I remember playing, Spin the Bottle and, 7 Minutes in Heaven in the closet. And I was honestly just terrified, like terrified. And nobody else seemed terrified. So, I'm not saying that was true, but nobody else,
Right.
to me, to be terrified. So, I think getting the books was probably just part of me trying to like learn something and take care of myself somehow.
I
Yeah.
love that. So what did you do with that
No,
information? Did you go to school? I mean, not at that moment, but like, did you
no.
go to school to be like, what did you go to school for?
So later on, much, much further down the road, skip over ahead, many, obviously lifetimes, basically. Um, I eventually went back to graduate school a second time for a degree in counseling psych. So I became a psychotherapist.
Okay.
That's my background. And I learned a lot from those teenage years, though. I was also part of a youth group where we would be able to go away without our parents, and like the young adults that were taking care of us answered all our questions. And so I think I always had this like sense of of love and intimacy and relationship, even though, like I said, it was completely confusing and always seemed to be elusive for me. But also had this experience of like safety and community going away on these weekends repeatedly and for summer camps and things. Um, that later on, fast forward, it was something that I created. Like part of what I've created in my life is also community and places
I
where
love
people can ask questions and be curious and have
right.
experiences and and figure out what they like and they don't like. And so that's part of the story. And the other part is going through a marriage and going through a divorce and studying actually divorce mediation as part of my therapy training and couples therapy as part of my therapy training. And I want to credit my ex-husband right here and now because he is one of the people out when we walked outside of a therapy session that we were in together, already divorced, said to me, you should think about doing this work. You're really good at it. I was kind of shocked.
Okay,
And I
great.
thought, yeah, right on.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. So
Yeah.
how do you work with your clients? Do you work always in group? Do you work one-on-one? How do you work with your clients now?
I do both. I do a lot of groups. I really like group energy. I like the collective experience of people contributing to the experience. Like I
Yeah,
know that I'm in the role of facilitator and I've set the stage and I've set the intention and I'm holding and creating the space, but I feel like everybody contributes and I invite people to do that as well. And so I like the group energy and the group dynamics. And I like when people are learning from each other's experience. So I spent about 20 years doing mostly couples work privately in a private practice that was just two on one, but still group energy with three of.
sure.
So I do work with individuals, yes, mostly in like a higher end sort of VIP. So I have like a few individuals. Mostly these days, it's my Heal Your Heart program, which is a group program that has a hybrid component online and in person and then just a lot of teaching either online or locally in the New England area, although I just got back from Sweden, so many different places actually.
Nice.
But those are all group classes, workshops, and retreats. I'm a big fan of taking people to beautiful places.
I know, I've seen some of your pictures.
Yes.
Who comes to you? Who comes to the Heal Your Heart program? Like why are people drawn to you? What are they looking for?
Yeah, I would think it's a good question. Most people that come have just been through or recently been through some kind of heartache or heartbreak, a divorce, a separation, a death. It could be something recent, it might be something in the past, but what they're finding either way is that they are craving recovery from that situation, reconnection with themselves, and connection with a partner. And so that I would say that's the majority. There are definitely couples that come that want support in reconnecting and participate with the singles, and just it applies really well to like rejuvenating their connection, their marriage or their
Because
partnership.
you're not pointing the finger, right? Like when you're doing the color, it's all about self,
It's
not
all about
about
self.
yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So I would say the majority, and it took me a little while to figure this out, but the majority of people who come are either um, just out of a relationship or a divorce, or just have been, in their 30s and 40s and maybe 50 now and still single and kind of wondering what's going on. Why am I still single? What's happening? Even if they're, out of a relationship too. And then the work is really about looking inside. And I have a process I call the four gates to come back to love. Come back to love is the name of my business. And it helps people really do some deep self-inquiry work to look at what's hiding beneath the surface that's preventing them from actually having the relationship that they want. So it is all about self, and then they can bring it out into the world. I always tell them if they choose.
Right. Right. Here's the information. Now you get to
Yeah.
decide what to do with it. And do you work mostly with women, men, both?
Both so
Okay.
evenly, such an even distribution. Yeah.
That's
Men.
beautiful. And oftentimes we carry pain from our past relationships, childhood wounds, and then we start repeating the same patterns, right? How do you help them begin that process of healing?
It's a great question. The first thing I bring everybody to, I call them all of these things invitations. So one of the
That's
first,
my language too. When I talk to my
Good.
clients, this is an invitation. Do
Take
with
it or
it what you
leave it.
choose. Yep.
Exactly. RSVP as you
Yep.
wish.
Yep.
Um, I think that choice is obviously really important.
Right.
One of the first things that I do is I teach people a meditation that I call bridge meditation. And it invites them to look at what's happening now in the present today. What are the themes that they're seeing? And I do invite people to sort of look over a few things and kind of grab some themes, see which ones stand out the most. And then we do a meditation, which actually I think comes from the internal family systems work,
Okay.
probably where I learned it first, because I've been doing IFS work for 20 years or more. Um, and basically, then I guide them through a visualization of bridging back from the present back to where this initial pattern or theme originated. And sometimes I tell people, sometimes it's this life, sometimes it's a past life. Wherever it lands, it lands. And then you get to look at like, oh, there's another piece there of work that is need
Right.
to be done because it's impacting and influencing what's happening in the present. It's not the only way to get to that information, but it's where I begin. Yeah.
I love that. Are most of the clients that you work with, have they already done some level of self-awareness work, or are they coming to, so do they already have that sense of, I need to look at me? Because, as you know, and some of the listeners know,
Yeah.
I used to be a professional matchmaker and a date and relationship coach.
Yeah.
And so often I would have conversations with people where they were always pointing the finger at the other person, right? Well, my a marriage ended because we just fell out of love. My marriage ended, like nobody's relationship ended because of infidelity or addiction. It was like we just fell apart because they weren't doing the work to stay together,
Right.
right? And there was not a lot of self-awareness in that. So I'm curious, if how do you then, if people are listening and maybe don't realize that this might be them, what are some signs that they of unresolved trauma or grief that might be blocking them from really receiving love and having healthier relationships so they don't keep repeating the pattern?
Yeah. So I'll answer the first question first and then link it to the second and remind me if I forget.
Yeah, I was like, wait, there's a lot here I want to say.
Yeah,
I don't know how to get this all out.
it's okay. It's all good. Um, so I would say most people that come to me are have done some work.
Okay,
But having done some work doesn't mean necessarily what you just said, which is that they're
right.
really fully ready to take ownership because it is so much easier to look outside.
Yeah,
We're trained, as one of my spiritual teachers said last night, we're trained to have a problem inside and look outside for the solution. That is the Western way of healing.
right.
It's what our whole entire medical system is based on.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
therapy also.
Yeah.
I mean, all of it.
And I
Um,
think there's a balance, right? There are some things outside that can help you heal the inside,
yes.
but we have to know that it's all with inside. Yeah.
Yes, but our first inclination is to look outside, which accounts for a lot of the blaming and shaming of the other person
Yeah.
or the relationship, but often it's the other person, unfortunately. They're doing something wrong, they need to change, or I can't stay. Fill in the blank, we can fill that.
Right.
Lots of other ways that people perceive that. Um, and so that's the first piece. So, yeah. And the second piece has to do with what
Some of the signs that
some
they
of the
may be able to
signs.
see
Yes,
that
yes,
they
yes.
have
I had
unresolved
it
trauma or
out of
grief.
my
Yeah.
brain.
It's all
Yeah,
good.
the the most the easiest way to see if that is happening is that the patterns are repeating,
Hmm.
right? Because if the healing is complete or, close to complete, because I'm not sure how I feel
I
about
was gonna say, how do we know,
completely
right?
complete.
Yeah.
Um, then, if the healing is complete and the soul is done also with this piece, then it doesn't repeat itself.
Right.
But when we see things like the same pattern showing up, it can be the same way of getting into a relationship. It can be the same repeated patterns getting out of relationships. It could be, oh, I keep choosing someone who's exactly like my alcoholic father, or I married my mother and now I'm in another relationship and she also looks like my mother.
Right.
Those are the patterns that we look for. And it's important because it's actually just showing the next layer that, needs or requires attention for healing. Everybody asks that question that you just asked, which I think is, well, how do I know that I have more work
Right.
to have?
My husband and I are leaving for a couples retreat tomorrow. And I
Oh,
said to him the last few days, I was like, wow, there's got to be some preparation going on here. I was like, because literally everything you're doing is triggering the shit out of me. And I know it's mine, right? Like I know
yeah,
it's work, but I'm like, oh yeah, everything is bubbling up to the surface to be healed, right? Or to be looked
exactly.
at under
Yes,
under a microscope with other people participating. But it is
yes.
fascinating. Like when you do some work, then you can start to see the patterns. And I'm like, huh, wow, he's breathing really heavy right now.
It's so funny. It's so true. We're human. It's really hard to
Right.
be in relationship, especially when you're living in the same space.
Right. It's so funny you say that because when I was coaching at the matchmaking company, I had a conversation with a client who felt like she was in a great place. She's like, I've done so much work. She's like, now I need to be in relationship to see how it plays out, right? Because
Right.
like we're all great when there's nobody we have to interact with, right? Like, oh my
Yes.
God, I'm doing great. But then you go to the supermarket, you talk to a partner or a relative, right? And then those triggers come up because yeah, you can do all the work and be great solo, but until you're
Yes.
in relationship is when it really starts to show up.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. 100.
How do you, intimacy, I talk a lot with my clients about, relationship with self. You have to be in relationship with self before you're in relationship with others. And I know you talk a lot about intimacy. How do you help your clients? I would imagine you talk to them about bringing more intimacy into their own lives so that they can then be intimate with others, right? And intimacy isn't just about sex or romance, right? But how do you help people?
Yeah.
What are some things that people can do to bring intimacy into their lives?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, for one thing, we just, like you just said, but just to say it again, like intimacy is not sex. It can be, sex can be intimate,
Right,
but intimacy is not sex. And I think just to say that because there's so many code words out there, and that's one of them.
right.
There's physical intimacy, there's emotional intimacy, there's spiritual intimacy, there's
Yeah,
intimacy on many levels. So, one of the things, though, I do talk about are the elements of intimacy that you need to, or not need to, but could um, learn and practice with yourself. And one of the most important ones is vulnerability.
that's my four-letter word that I've worked on for years. Yes. Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because if we can't be vulnerable and honest with ourselves, then it will be very challenging to be vulnerable and honest with someone else. And
yeah,
without the vulnerability and the honesty with another person, like that's the intimacy. That's where the intimacy is. Somebody
yeah.
was saying, and I'm sure you know this, Francine, but somebody was saying to me the other day, like, oh, um, I don't fight, my, so and so, we never fight. And they were sort of saying it in a proud way. And I was like, oh, that's really great. And then I said something like, well, the research shows actually that for the couples that don't fight, those are the ones that get divorced more often than the ones that do. And
Right,
he's like, oh. And he said, well, how come? And I said, because when you're fighting, you're being honest and intimate with each other. He's like,
right.
oh, um,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
there's different ways of fighting too, right? Like I
sure.
think especially if you come from abusive backgrounds, right? Like raising a voice, right? Like for years, my husband would say to me, if we fought, he thought we were going to get divorced. And he does not come from divorced parents. I do. So that was
Mhm.
always fascinating to me. So he never wanted to fight because to him, fighting meant divorce. And I was like, where
Right.
does that come from?
Yes, somewhere, some lifetime.
Right.
Those,
Yeah. Because
yeah.
I am the child of divorced parents and I don't actually believe that that's true. Right. But we had to find a way that like we can disagree in a healthy manner so that he feels safe and I feel safe. Right. Like,
Yes, tone is such a big one. It's a really, really big one. It can trigger people in very
yeah.
significant ways, and it can be hard, challenging to change inside yourself when you're used to speaking with a certain tone. So it
Right.
gets like very tricky between two people.
Yeah. Well, and it's, what I say, I heard once there's like six sides of a conversation, right? What I said, what you think I said, what I think you heard, what you think
Yes,
right? Like, and then you're like, none of it's true, right? Yeah.
exactly. Yes.
How can we stay open to love in a
Mhm.
world that maybe feels a little crazy at times?
Hmm. Such a good question. Yeah, it's really a practice. I mean, like a practice, like a daily, more than daily practice. Because there is, just to state the obvious again, there is so much going on in the world. There's always so much going on. There's a lot that happens to be going on right now. And it can put people in a state of fear. It can put people in a state of feeling closed off, and afraid to open and afraid to be present even, because people aren't
Yeah.
safe necessarily. And that is a huge um, process. Like I don't want to say huge process. There's many different ways to work with that. But one of the ways is to have a daily practice of some kind of meditation. I lead one every Monday for my community members. And basically what we're doing is like putting our hands on our hearts and grounding. First thing, extremely important because we can just be like way not connected when we're in fear. Paying attention to our energy field and what it's doing. We always work on expanding our energy fields because, again, when we're in fear, we just get really contracted and then we can't be open. So
Yeah.
we work on really expanding the energy field way out into the infinite universe, which is feels really good. And then literally like engaging love, like in its pure form. And I teach many different strategies and energy practices. And um, but a simple way is to think of what your identification is with pure love. A lot of people might think of their grandmothers or
Mm.
someone they knew, like a teacher that was just like the embodiment of love. You want it to be pure. You don't want
Right.
to go into, other difficult difficulties. And then very simple practices to bring that love that the person's embodying in front of you into your energy field, into your body, grounded. So I'm running through quickly sort of a, you know,
Sure. Yeah.
20-minute, 15 to 20-minute meditation to really come back, the name of my business, come back to love
Right.
in a very tangible way that and the practice feeds itself. The frequency of the practice, we do it once a week, but I encourage people to listen, to the recordings over and
Sure.
over again because as you practice something like that, you're also rewiring your brain, which is another big part of my work. Really doing this neuroplasticity work where you're rewiring your brain. And in this case, to rewire to stay open to love.
Mm.
And then to get back to just sort of mundane, back to the vulnerability, like to naming, I'm afraid, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling contracted, I'm worried, I'm whatever the words are.
Right.
Because when you're speaking to them, you're freeing them up and you're allowing space for other things to come in and you're allowing people to connect with you. And the connection is where the love is.
Yeah.
So,
It-
different ways, you can work on this.
And I think, a lot of the work I do with my clients is, most of my clients live from their neck up
Mm.
and don't even realize they have a body, right? So it's like feeling the feelings in your body. And I remember I was laid off from a corporate job in 2019 and then COVID happened. And that's when I went full time in my coaching business. But I remember having job interviews and feeling that constriction in my body and then coaching and feeling the expansion. And I was like, oh, hold on. And I
Mm.
said to my husband one day, I was like, we need to talk because I think like my body was clearly saying to me, no, danger, 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 right? But like noticing that because our bodies do give us signs and symbols, right? Signs and
Yeah.
signals for us to pay attention. But when we're so busy in our head, it's hard to read that. So is a lot of the work that you do with your clients have moving them from the brain into the body and really
Yeah, 100%.
quieting that?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's all embodied work,
Yeah.
no matter what, because yeah, it's when we're disconnected like that, we can't access what's happening, and we it's way more difficult to make changes.
Yeah. What's the biggest block that you see when it comes to people allowing themselves to be fully loved or fully seen?
I bet you know what I'm going to say. Starts with a T, trust.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
trust.
is it trusting self or trusting others?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna, yeah, fill in the
Yeah.
blanks with. Yeah, trusting. So trust is the headline, and there's layers to it. There's trusting yourself,
Yeah.
especially when you've made decisions that you might judge as not good decisions. They might be perfectly and probably were perfectly good decisions for the moment, but often people will look back and say, "Oh, that was a bad decision. I shouldn't have chosen that person." But that's not
Right.
that's not my belief system.
And I don't believe anything is right or wrong, good or bad, right? Because you
Right.
learn from every
From everything.
experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
there's trust of self, which also can come from childhood trauma. I mean, there's layers that of
Right.
trusting the self that have to do with healing the negative and difficult things that happened in the past. And then there's trusting others, which, is a big topic. If you've been through a betrayal, it's a
Right.
big topic. But any kind of separation, it's going to bring issues of trust and trusting others. But the real trust is to trust yourself. Because a lot of people will say, well, I don't trust fill in the blank with the gender. And I always say, well, do you trust yourself? Do you like how are you with discernment? You know,
Mm.
like how's your intuition? Are you listening to your intuition? When you get messages that are probably truths, are you embracing them or pushing them away, doubting?
I've had people say I have a bad picker, and I'm like, oh, right?
Yeah.
Like, right? They take on so much responsibility of being wrong, right?
Yes. Yes. And if they feel that, then it could be like, well, let's look at like what are red flags that you're letting go by? Because that's a common thing people will do. They'll like
Yeah.
notice the red flags, but they just don't pay any attention to them because there's other parts that really want the connection. So instead, they just sort of ignore those things. And those are skills you can learn also. It's like
And
I feel that same way when somebody says to me, I have a bad picker. I'm like,
right. And would you also say, I had this conversation a few months ago in a workshop I was teaching on how to manifest your partner. And she was talking about she had been on a date and this person had red flags. And I was like, so tell me more about them. And like what she said did not feel like a red flag to me, right? I was like, so what makes that a red flag? She's like, well, I think he was talking about, I don't know, childbirth or having babies. And I was like, so, but it was only our first or second date, whatever it was, right? And I was like, okay, again, why is that a red flag? But and as we got to it, really, she was afraid because she really does want relationship. But then when she has somebody who's actually talking about the future, then that became a red. Then he became wrong, right? So,
yeah,
how often are people like? I even hate the term red flag,
I
right?
know,
I
yeah.
mean, I used to hear that so much in the dating world. I had one woman tell me that the guy showed up with a phone on his belt buckle, and I was like, okay, so like that's what's keeping you out of relationship, right? Like that was her red flag that like she wanted no part of this, right? So often when we are in our wounding and our trauma, we're going to find anything that's wrong. So how do we decipher a true red flag from a this is what's going to keep me out of relationships so I can be pissed that I'm not in relationship and be complaining, like that cycle of being not in
Yes.
relationship.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think so there's a couple of things. When it's something unhealthy, so that's when it's more obvious, right? The
Yeah.
person's over drinking, they're taking drugs, they're
Yeah.
not working and kind of, unmotivated, like, you know, etc.
Right.
We all know what those are, and those are, yeah, the language is a little weird. I agree.
And I think it's that inner feeling, that inner knowing, right? Like, ooh, this doesn't feel good and I'm going to ignore it.
Yeah.
Like, because I mean, I've done that in jobs, right? I remember having an interview going, I don't know about this, but they wanted to pay me a lot of money and offered me the job, but and
But
8 months later they closed, right? Like,
you knew ahead of time. This isn't going.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean that is a really good point. When we have a feeling like this isn't going anywhere, but we just ignore that. And we do
yeah,
that because we have parts that so desire and crave belonging, connection, intimacy. And those parts are pretty strong inside ourselves, especially if there's been some kind of trauma,
right.
there has been for a lot of people. Those parts that really want connection, love, belonging are very, very strong. And
Mm,
so it can be easier to bypass or just to ignore. Like I
right.
just gave that example of ignoring intuition.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to really do some self-inquiry, looking inside to see like, am I just making excuses because am afraid, or this isn't a good time for me to be in a relationship, but I think I
Right.
should be. So I'm, you know,
Yeah.
and really knowing like, are you afraid? Are you afraid? That's a great question. I mean, love is scary. Being afraid is normal.
Right. Right.
It's
Right.
okay to
And it's
be afraid.
information, right? It's just
Yes.
information too.
Yes.
How would you tell, what would you tell someone, or how would you support someone who says they want to be in love, but they also are terrified of vulnerability or rejection? Like, how do you balance that?
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things that came up for me a minute ago, which has to do with safety.
Okay. Yeah.
A red flag to somebody might be because the parts that are vulnerable don't feel safe.
Hmm.
We don't want to ignore that. You know,
Yeah.
that's actually discernment. And so that's the really most important piece, is like, what to really get to know yourself and know what are the things, what are the personality traits, the energy, the tone of voice, even how somebody looks, that have you feel safe. Because ultimately the relationship is about your parts feeling safe enough to be in the relationship.
Right.
And for the relationship then to create safety for each person to be able to be their full selves over time. And so the best is when the relationship container can keep expanding and expanding to accommodate the growth of each of the people in it. But it has to start initially with really feeling safe. And I think that's a really, really big topic and a great place to start.
What are some tips? Because I know I run into this with a lot of my clients where they are doing their own work, but maybe their partners aren't.
Mm,
Right? Or they're not doing it together. So while in my private practice, I don't necessarily consider myself a relationship coach, but I'm a mindset coach, and that encompasses all areas of people's life. And relationship inevitably always comes up, right?
yeah.
So how would you like, what advice would you give to people that are doing their work, but maybe their partners aren't? And they're always, well, he won't do this or she won't do that or whatever the gender is.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm going to say something that's not that popular. So, of course, we all have to do our own,
Yeah.
we don't have to. Again, we can choose to
An
do
invitation.
individual work. It's an invitation.
Yeah.
When I say have to, it's because sometimes there's something inside of us that like it can't not.
Right.
That's been my experience of maybe not wanting to grow away from a person, but my whole being is going in the direction of that kind of healing or that kind of experience that then impacts the rest of my life. But I but I can't not do it.
Do
Like
it. Right.
just have that feeling in my body. So there's that. There's also real respect for the relationship itself. And when one person is growing, often one person will grow a bit, then the other person will catch up. Maybe that person will grow a bit, the other person catches up. But when relationships get in trouble, it's when one person has really shot way, way up in their growth and the other person just isn't interested. It's not the right time for them, it's not the right pace for them. And that does create, a real disconnect that can
Yeah.
end in a separation. And so if there's a conscious choice along the way for the person who's sprouting up to say, you know what, I'm gonna pause. Like this relationship is important to me, my family, my kids, whatever they have created together. And yeah, I because once there's a disconnect like that, ugh.
Yeah, I remember when I was in healing school, so this was probably 10 years ago or so. Um, I had what I called my dark night of the soul in my first year of healing school, and I came home and like literally shut down. And for a month, I barely spoke to my husband. He's like, "Are we getting divorced? Like, what's happening?" I was like, "I don't know." Like, and he was like, "How long do you do this work for?" Because he wasn't at the time doing work, and he's like, "When does it end?"
Right.
And I was like, "Ooh, yeah, this doesn't end." And then as he saw me grow, that's when he decided he wanted to do his own work. And, at the time I said, "You have to do this for you, not for me." And he will now admit, he's like, "Yeah, I probably in the beginning was doing it for you because I think he started it out of fear that we were going to grow apart." But it helped us have language and conversations that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Right? But it did I did notice that disconnect when I was doing the work and he wasn't, right? And of course, it's I'm embodied in it every day, so I'm, like, "Ooh, why did I just get triggered? Ooh, what just happened?" Right? A little bit more than he is, but still he's doing his work, I'm doing mine, and we're doing ours, right? Because it's hard if you're not.
It is. And now that I'm, speaking about this, it's not new information for me exactly, but I'm just reflecting that it's really what led to my separation, the separation I went through in divorce from my children's father, because I had taken on this really intensive um, women's empowerment and leadership work and basically like deep, deep emotional and shamanic healing practices in my early 30s. And my ex-husband, God love him, would say that whenever I came back in from the weekend when we had gathered, he had no idea who was going to be walking in the door,
Mm,
which is really painful and hard,
yeah,
and he rolled with it for several years, but it changed me so much.
yeah,
Changed me is not even the right language. It brought me back. It chipped away at all the things that were not me.
right.
And then who were we?
Yeah,
The relationship didn't ultimately survive that.
right, right,
Yeah.
right. What is your personal, just speaking of your thing in your 30s, but what has your journey taught you about love and human connection?
Mm. Oh my goodness, so much. Oh, how to answer that question. I mean, my journey has taught me basically all the things that I said, that safety is really important for my young parts. My
Mm,
young parts that were um, in a lived experience of my mother who was depressed and anxious and then sick for 4 years and then died when I was 10 years old. Like those parts are still so tender. And I've done
right,
a gazillion things and yes, healed so many, even just to be able to talk about it, right? I
right,
even talk about it 40 years ago. Um, but those parts need a lot of like love and tenderness and care and slowing things down and presence. And and without that, they don't feel safe enough to open, to love, to trust. And so I know that about myself. And so I've tried different ways of relating. I've tried relating in open formats. I've tried relating in monogamous formats. And what I ultimately realize is those parts really like monogamy,
mm,
like a mostly monogamous situation because there's presence, connection, commitment. Not that there's not those things in other ways of relating, but
sure,
those parts just get triggered, afraid, they
right,
get afraid. And so I've come to a place of like really accepting that and embracing that and really respecting and honoring those parts inside myself.
mm, I
Those are
love
the
that.
ones that are vulnerable and
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's
morning.
interesting how things come up in different times of your life too, right? Like my mom passed away, but she was only 48 and I was just 26
Mm.
and I turned 60 this year.
Sexy, you mean
Yeah,
sexy?
yeah, 60. That's it. Oh, I like that. I'm going to start
Yes.
saying that. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you. I'm 60.
Mhm.
Um, and it was fascinating to me how much shit came up over the last year as I was heading towards 60. Like all this guilt that I actually get to be 60 and my mother did, right? Like it was really fascinating to me how, because I was like, why am I struggling so hard about 60? Because I hadn't, like other ages just were just ages, right? But it was really fascinating to me what was coming up over the last year as I was heading into, and it's still, I think, still there, right? There's still some stuff I'm
Yeah,
working through, but it's interesting how, I mean, my mom died in 91. It's 34 years ago, right? Like, I'm not even the same person, like it was more than half my life ago, right? But it
right.
really is
Yes.
interesting how, as we do other work, other layers are shown, come
Yeah,
up.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I always love asking this question. I could talk to you forever, but I'm mindful of the time. But I always love asking this question. What is something that you live by that you want to share with our listeners?
Sure. Great question. One of my mantras is love no matter what.
Mm,
And it's a tall order. It's a steep commitment, as I like to call it. It's a tall order, but it is something that I practice. And when I lead my retreats or a certain um, class that I lead once a month in the Boston area, that's a tantric based ritual, basically
mm,
authentic relating type of experience. And in the end, all of our hearts are so open. It's like we're mush, like, people come in with like headaches, blah, cranky, creepy,
yeah.
blah. And then when they leave, they're just like, oh my God, I'm so filled with love. It's amazing to witness. And in that moment, at the end, we work with the energy of love. So we circulate it through our bodies and we might place it somewhere like in a right hip that's sore or, whatever. And we might send it to someone that we love and care about. Then I always invite people to send it to somebody that they have decided for themselves doesn't deserve love, someone that
Ooh,
they judge as not deserving love. And, people might gasp a little bit. But I really, because all of these things are personalities and they're not who we are in our essence of ourselves. I mean, our essence, I believe, is love.
right.
So this practice of love no matter what really guides a lot of what I do. And the way that I relate with people. I was saying to someone just yesterday, I'm not the kind of person who tends to take sides. It's not 100% true. I might align myself here and there, but I tend to be able to see things from all directions. It's just who I am. And
I'm like that too. It used to
are
drive,
you?
it still
Yeah.
drives my sisters crazy. They're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, why do you have to? I'm like, I don't know. I just see all sides.
It drives some people crazy. Most of the time it drives people crazy that want you to align with them.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but it's also the practice. It also, hinges on love no matter what. Like,
right.
as I can see all the things that are going on. So anyway, that's for me really important.
I love that. Oh, thank you for sharing that. So tell our listeners how they can find you. We'll put everything in the show notes, but what's the best way for them to find you?
Comeback to love.com. They will find me and a list of local classes and not local classes, classes online, destination retreats. We've got one coming up in Italy soon and in Costa Rica. So
Mm,
all of that is on my website. And as I like to tell people, I answer all my emails. So feel free to reach out. There's a contact form there. They can find me. Also, I'm very present on Facebook. So that's another place they can look.
okay, perfect. And all that'll be in our show notes. And I know you have an offer that you're going to make to the listeners. It's the 5 elements of intimacy training, and we'll put that link in there as well. You want to just give them an idea of what that is?
Sure, that is a really wonderful training on one of the things we talked about during our conversation today, which is about how to develop intimacy with yourself so that you actually can be intimate with another person. And I
I
talked
love
about
that.
Yeah, one of the five elements, which is vulnerability. And when they download the rest of the class, they will learn the other four.
I love that. Robin, thank you so much for being here today. This has been such a great conversation. I do pull cards, and I've got three cards in front of me, and this is from the
Okay.
Divine Feminine deck, which I just thought was perfect when those were spoken to me. So I have three cards. One is on the left, the center, and the right. So I'm going to have you choose which card speaks to you.
Oh my goodness, I have to go with what I'm seeing in my mind, and I'm seeing right more than the left. So I'm
That's
gonna
the
say,
one I knew too. That's
oh,
the one I saw for you. Ah,
wait, oh,
the
that's
God.
funny.
The goddess of, this is Kuan Yin, the goddess of compassion. I recognize suffering in order to release it. Curiosity breeds compassion.
Oh,
I
beautiful.
love that.
It's so perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. And for those
Great.
that chose center, Mary of Nazareth, the mother of God, I am blessed. My courage gives birth to the divine.
Beautiful.
And if you chose left, Inanna, the queen of heaven and earth, I have nothing to hide. I see and accept all that I am.
Beautiful.
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you so much for being here today. This has been such a fun conversation. And for those of you listening, thank you for joining me today on this journey of this great conversation. I've truly enjoyed it. Remember, transformation begins from within. Embrace your inner wisdom. Allow yourself to navigate your path with a renewed sense of purpose. If you found today's episode valuable, please subscribe, leave a review, share, do all the things that you do. Stay connected in our community. Both Robin and mine information will be in the show notes. And until next time, continue to shine your light, walk in peace and love. I am Francine Terrell, and this has been Effin' Fridays with Francine. Robin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.